Well, hello everyone, and welcome to day 3 of Amber's Careers Week. I'm delighted to be joined today by John Blakey, who's going to be talking us through the 9 habits for the new world of work. But before I hand over, just to remind you, we like these sessions to be as interactive as possible. And there's lots of opportunities throughout the webinar to ask questions, and which John's happy to pause to answer throughout the course of the event. So you'll see a little questions tab just in your control panel. Please feel free to pop these in, and every now and again we'll take a little pause and try and get through as many as we can. So without further ado, I'll hand over to John. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I understand that there'll be people dialing in from around the world, so it's great always to be part of a global community and a global community of MBAs and graduates in the business world. It's many, many years since I did my MBA at Aston Business School, but it's not quite so long since I finished my DBA at Aston, which is the basis of the research that I'm going to share with you today. So it's great to be amongst an audience that is committed to business education and personal growth through those qualifications. So as David mentioned, the theme for today is 9 habits for the new world of work. Now, I don't know where you are in the world and what you are with COVID and lockdown and everything, but here in the UK, we are emerging slowly out of lockdown. Last night, it was my 25-year-old son's birthday, and we sneaked out to the pub and celebrated, which is the first time we've been able to do that for 3 months. So that was a big event, but it made me think that we are coming out of this now, aren't we? At least in this country. You know, I know in many countries around the world, it's at different stages. But we are going to come out of this at some point. And what are we going to come out of this to? You know, what are we now going to build on the other side of this pandemic? And, you know, you hear these phrases, don't you, at the moment about build back better. I heard it also this week, build back greener, build back fairer. You know, what are we going to build back, and what is the world of work, the new world of work that we want to build together in our organizations as leaders? And that's very much the focus of my session today, is to invite you and to prompt you and challenge you to think about, what are we building back, and are we going to build back better? Are we going to build back greener, and are we going to build back fairer? As David said, I'm going to pause at certain points. I'm going to basically do 3 sprints of content here. I'm going to do a 10-minute burst of content, but I'm going to pause then. And I'd really love you to be putting questions in the chat as we go through, so that when I pause, I'm going to turn to David and say, David, what questions have we got from our participants? So please, that'll keep the energy high if we can get your engagement. So if you've got a question, please throw it in there at any point, and then we'll be pausing every 10-15 minutes to get your questions, which I can answer and make sure we tailor this to where your energy and interest is. So with no further ado, let me show you my favorite image from the first pandemic lockdown here in the UK. And I woke up one Saturday morning last April in the midst of the gloom and doom of lockdown, and I opened my LinkedIn feed and I saw this picture. And there was a whole buzz of joy and excitement around this picture, which I got sucked up into. And it turns out that this picture was taken by somebody in a village called Pathankot in northern India. And they'd woken up that morning in the middle of their lockdown, and they'd seen something they hadn't seen for 30 years. 200 kilometers away from Pathankot is the Himalaya mountain range. And that morning, for the first time in 30 years, because the smog had lifted in lockdown, they saw this beautiful vision of the Himalaya mountain range. And it reminded me, when I saw this picture, of the quote by Marcel Proust, which says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. And I think this is an opportunity as we come out of a pandemic, is to see with new eyes, to build that new world of work, to see with new eyes. And many of us haven't been able to seek new lands for 12 months because we have been locked down, but we can still see with new eyes. And that's the challenge I think we've all got right now as leaders, is can we see with new eyes? And the irony of the smog clearing to show us the Himalayas is that smog was the product of what I call the industrial age. And the industrial age gave us many great things, but it also gave us smog. And as the smog clears, to me, that's symbolic that we're entering a new age, that we're emerging from that industrial age, and we're actually entering something that I call the social age, which will have different rules of leadership, different worlds of work that will be created that match that social age. And another way of talking about this, another way of seeing with new eyes, is I've been recently reading a book called Donut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. I hope that some of you have come across that work by Kate Raworth. If you haven't, I thoroughly recommend it. Fantastically thought-provoking book, because Kate is seeing with new eyes from a perspective of an economist. And what she does in this book is she shifts that economic thinking from the industrial age economic thinking, in which it was all about GDP, 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 the singular pursuit of economic growth as the sole purpose of our business endeavors. The shift from that as the industrial age mantra to the social age, where she talks about we need a new vision. And she talks about donut economics, that the vision is captured in this diagram of the donut. And she says, rather than pursuing GDP, 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 in the social age, our vision needs to be to create a safe and just space for humanity. So the donut layer in this diagram, a safe and just space for humanity. And that safe and just space is bounded by 2 limits. On the one hand, ecological ceilings that we see around the edge of the donut, and then on the other hand, social foundations that are on the interior of that donut. And we've seen that in the past 12 months, the 2 biggest issues we've grappled with at a macro level, a pandemic, which is an issue of safety, and Black Lives Matter, which is an issue of justice. So when people talk about building back better, building back greener, building back fairer, they're talking about creating this safe and just space for humanity. Now, I hope for you that's an exciting vision, that in this social age, we might see with new eyes in order to create a safe and just space for humanity. But it involves a massive change for all of us, and it will have an impact on all of our worlds of work over a period of time. Now, my specialism is trust. That's what I spent 6 years researching at Aston Business School for my DBA. And trust, as I researched it, the reason that became the focus was that part of this shift from the industrial age to the social age, from GDP to the safe and just space, is also a shift in the currency of leadership. When I did my MBA all those years ago, I was really studying in a world characterized by power, where power was the currency of leadership. And my MBA and all the mentoring and education I did at that time was really to train me to be a master of the world of power. But the world of power of the industrial age is being replaced by the world of trust of the social age. And people like me are having to unlearn the habits of power, and we're having to learn new habits of trust. Because if we want to renew our license to lead in the social age, then it's trust that needs to be the currency of our leadership. And this is my favorite quote from the author Charles Green about this shift. He says, leaders can no longer trust in power. Instead, they must rely upon the power of trust. And my research, my writing of the book, The Trusted Executive, and the organization, the not-for-profit organization, the Trusted Executive Foundation that I founded in 2016, it's all about helping leaders like you who want to stand for trust. So if you want to be part of this shift, if you want to lead and pioneer in this shift and stand for trust at these times, then that is the real focus of my work and the work of my colleagues at the Trusted Executive Foundation. And of course, if you do focus on trust and you do stand for trust at this time, you will yield impact and benefit for your organizations. Trust is the one thing that changes everything. It is the magic wand. I could share with you many, many different slides that show the multiple positive impacts of trust on all sorts of outcomes, ranging from customer loyalty to innovation to profitability. But one of my favorites that I'm going to share today is the work of Dr. Paul Zak. And in his article, The Neuroscience of Trust in Harvard Business Review, he compared high trust cultures to low trust cultures. And what he found was that in high trust cultures, 74% less stress, 13% less sick days, 50% more productivity, 76% more employee engagement. So that is the magic wand that you can wave as a leader focused on trust. These are the benefits that you can accrue for your organization if you put trust at the heart of your culture. So I just want to pause. That's my first sprint that I've done, really, just to give you that big picture. You know, why would we focus on trust? Why would we do that now? And what is the impact of that on the new world of work? So I've given you that context in terms of what I think is going on in the leadership world as a whole. We'll move on to look at how we manage that, and in particular the 9 habits to manage that. But I just want to pause at that moment and come to David and just say, David, have we got any pioneering participants who've put in those early questions for the webinar today? Is there anything we've got that we can have a little dip into before I move on with the second sprint?
Do indeed. We've got loads of questions coming through. So I'll just get straight to it. So the first question we've had is, great question. There is an old age thought that trust has to be earned, and while this is old hat thinking, it's still sadly prevalent in the workplace, and they're just asking what your thoughts on the idea of trust being earned would be.
Yeah, does trust need to be earned? I think my short answer to that is yes. As leaders, we need to earn the trust of our followers, and as leaders, our job is to go first, to take the risk. I often talk about trust as a dance. That there's the leader and their trustworthiness, and there's the follower and their propensity to trust. So I can't control whether you trust me. That's your choice. What I can focus on is my trustworthiness, and am I worthy of your trust? And the habits that we'll look at in the remainder of this webinar really about building your trustworthiness and the trustworthiness of your brand. Ultimately, if I build that and if I work on that, hopefully I'm earning your trust over a period of time. But there will be some people that trust me much quicker than others, and there'll be some people who never trust me. That is their choice, and we're not in control of that. But what we are in control of is our trustworthiness, and that's how we earn the trust of others. Thank you, David.
Great stuff. So the next question that we've had come through is around transparency. So they're asking, you know, they appreciate that leaders do need to be trusted, but how does this relate to transparency? And in turn, how transparent do you think that leaders need to be?
Yeah, well, that's a powerful word, transparency. So thank you for bringing that in when we're talking about trust. And it reminds me of a quote from a lady called Fiammetta Borgia, who said, transparency is destroying the opaque lives of organizations. The more we know, the more there seems to be to disclose. And I think there is that in the social age, transparency, there's an appetite and a hunger and a drive for more transparency, more openness, more honesty. And obviously technology, social media enables that in the social age. So that transparency is one of the things that I think is driving this trust agenda at the moment, is that we demand that transparency. Modern stakeholders demand that transparency, and therefore leaders are having to get more and more used to being more and more open about things that, to be honest, 10 years ago were not shared, were not known. But in this different time, I think we are all challenged to be even more transparent and to really think, what else could I share here that might be role modeling that transparency in this organization. Maybe take one more, David. I've got a quick one there. Maybe take one more and I'll crack on.
Absolutely. This is a great question as well. They're asking, the social balance sheet is something that newer Generation Z clients and colleagues place a higher value on in a safe and just workspace for humanity. Do you agree that the bigger challenge here is senior team resistance to this empathetic new world?
Yes, to be blunt, is the short answer to that. You know, people of my age, people of my generation, as I say, we were brought up in a different time, and we have developed different habits. We value different things, and therefore I think there is a generation of leaders that currently has, occupies a lot of boardroom positions that are going through quite profound challenge and change. And we are working out how to get used to this, and we're, as I say, we're being challenged. But it's right, isn't it? It's right and proper that the younger generation challenges the older generation at some point in the cycle. I mean, that's how we move forward. So I would encourage all the younger people on this webinar is, please keep challenging us. Please keep speaking up. Please keep telling us what we can't see. We want to see with new eyes. Your eyes are better than ours. You're seeing it already. You can see the Himalayas much better than we can and I can. So please point it out to us, tell us, and that's the way that we will evolve this together, rather than creating the sort of culture wars that I think is the risk that we will descend into. That if we don't create the dialogue about how we all see with new eyes together, we will descend into some of these culture wars that unfortunately are plaguing a lot of our leadership institutions at this time, including the world of business. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Please keep those coming. That's what keeps it, really topical and engaging to get those. So I'm going to do another little sprint now, but then we'll pause. And the sprint I want to go on now, if I've looked at that big picture, why trust, why now, what's going on with the world of work, I want to drill down into that now and talk a bit more about how do we deal with that as leaders. How do we do this seeing with new eyes? That last question mentioned the social balance sheet. This new world of work that we are building, this new temple for business, which used to be all about profit, 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 that was the god of the temple of business. But in the social age, we're moving from that single bottom line focus to what I refer to as the triple bottom line: profit, people, and planet. And people refer to that in different ways: social balance sheet, environmental, social governance, investing, all of these new terms that are coming up in the literature now, which are really demonstrating to us that we are creating a new KPI for the world of business, and it is about something broader and more holistic than it used to be. So that is the new God in the temple that we're building in this new world of work. And then we have to think about what is going to hold this new world of work together. What are the sacred pillars in this temple? In that industrial age, it was all about intellectual ability and authority. If you had a brain and you were given a job title, then basically you put people in service of the world of profit. And that's broadly, it's grossly simplified, I know, but that's broadly how that temple was built. But the temple of trust needs to be built on something different than just intellectual ability and authority. What the temple of trust is built on is these three sacred pillars. That trustworthiness, my ability to inspire and earn your trust, is driven by my ability, my integrity, and my benevolence. And your brand's trustworthiness is driven by its ability, its integrity, and its benevolence. So on the one hand, I need to be competent at the job that I'm paid to do. I need to deliver on time, to budget, all of those things that are in that ability pillar. And then I have to have this integrity pillar. I need to walk the talk of my values and my ethics. And then lastly, this strange word, benevolence, which comes from the Latin words benevolent, which literally means wishing well for others. Benevolence is common human care, compassion, and kindness. And the key aspect of this formula for trustworthiness is that it's not ability add integrity add benevolence, it's ability times integrity times benevolence. So this is the academically researched formula for trustworthiness, that it's the product of these three pillars in this world of work. And for me, the real new kid on the block is this pillar of benevolence. I never went on the introduction to benevolence course for senior leaders. I've never been on that course. I've never seen the word benevolence in a leadership competency framework over the last 30 years of working in business. But if we want to be trusted, if we want to be the trusted ones, then that benevolence is equally important to the integrity and to the ability. We need to work all three pillars in parallel. And if we do that, we will differentiate ourselves on trust. whether that's individually as leaders or whether it's as organizationally through the power of our brands. So embracing that threefold approach to trustworthiness is part of this new world of work if we're making trust the currency of our leadership. And that brings me to my own research. So that ability, integrity, benevolence piece has been in the trust research for many, many years. But the piece that I wanted to get at in my research at Aston was really to say, okay, how do we take this down a level from concepts of 3 pillars to behavioral habits? Because I'm a very practical person. I work as a coach with leaders, and when they get this and they say, yeah, John, I want to stand for trust, and they turn to me and say, how do I do it? I wanted an academically verified answer to that question that isn't just my own subjective view. And what I can share with you is that after 6 years research, this is an academically verified model of trust. And if you do these 9 things in your daily leadership behaviors, you will build your trustworthiness. You will inspire that trust in the people around you. And as you can see on the model, there are 3 habits of ability, 3 habits of integrity, 3 habits of benevolence. Just very quickly giving you a feel for these habits. I'll talk a little bit more about some of them later, but I'll just give you a quick summary. But the habits of ability: deliver, coach, be consistent. The habits of integrity: be honest, be open, be humble. The habits of benevolence: evangelize, be brave, be kind. And if I look at those habits, and if you look at them now, there's probably some that you're quite familiar with and you've heard about in the world of business as part of your experience and studies over the years. I'll maybe highlight a couple just to pull them out and highlight this difference between the world of power and the world of trust. Let's take habit number 6, be humble. In the world of power, it was okay to be arrogant as long as you were successful. We sort of bought that. We might have been irritated by it occasionally, but we sort of bought that if you were successful, you could also be arrogant. In the world of trust, it doesn't matter how successful you are, we're still expecting that you will meet us on a level, eye to eye, human to human, and be humble in that space. So that's one of the differences, the shifts. Let's look at habit number 9, be kind. I did a session, a workshop on this work for 100 leaders in a hospital, and at the end of the session, everybody filed out, but there was one guy sat on a table looking a bit bemused, and I went up to him and said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I've just realised that kindness is part of leadership." And I said to him, "Well, what job do you do in the hospital?" And he said, "I'm a doctor," which worried me a little bit. But then he clarified it brilliantly, because he said to me, "I've always known that kindness was part of being a great doctor. I never knew kindness was part of being a great leader." And that's the shift. What a great day when you realize that part of leadership in the world of trust is being kind, permission to be kind. It's bringing that holistic approach back into the mix of leadership. So that again is maybe a newer, more different habit that we're getting used to. And maybe finally, from the habits of ability, I'll maybe just draw out that habit of coaching. You know, in the world of power, when you had authority and you had intellectual ability, you had the best answer and you told other people what that answer was and you expected them to get on and do it. That's how it worked, and most of us bought into that approach. But in the social age, people don't want to be told what to do. They want to be asked questions, they want to be listened to, they want to be empowered, and that's what we call coaching. So there are all these shifts going on, as I say, habits to unlearn, habits of power to unlearn, and habits of trust to learn afresh. And this shift is happening obviously at different pace, in different sectors, in different parts of the world. So you have to sort of look at this, engage, how does this fit into my world? But if you want to be a leader and if you want to be pioneering with this and standing for trust, then these are the habits that you would want to be practicing and working on and standing for in your leadership life. So I'm going to pause again, David, there. I think I've given another burst of content, so I'm just keen to hear back from our listeners in terms of any questions that you've seen popping up there.
Yeah, still loads of questions coming through. Right, what will I choose? Okay, so somebody's saying, this is an interesting one. I've looked at some trust related to specific professions. So they're saying they found out that the most trusted professions are nurses, the least trusted are politicians and journalists. And they're just asking if you've noticed any differences in trust related to sectors, and where does, sort of general business fit within this?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of research out there that will look at trust by sector, trust by country, trust by profession. One of the best pieces of research that I would sort of recommend people to look at is the Edelman Global Trust Barometer. This is released in January of each year. 33,000 participants from 28 different countries. Fantastic bit of research. And Edelman then analyze that data, and they produce fantastic sort of breakdown in terms of, what are the most trusted countries, what are the most trusted sectors, what are the most trusted professions. And the question, is dead right in terms of that certainly in my country, in the UK, doctors and nurses are right up there, which is interesting. Why that doctor that I was talking about, there's some research that says the moment a doctor gets promoted into a position of management, their trustworthiness drops 35% overnight. That's the impact it has when you suddenly get called the boss. That doctor will trust them as a doctor, but the moment you put some stripes on their arm and you say you're the boss, their trustworthiness drops 35%. That's the challenge that we face. Anybody who has that role, is that there's a lot of cynicism out there around business leadership. Business leaders that over time have maybe there's been all sorts of business scandals, haven't there, that we can name around the world. Every time we get those headlines, the Volkswagen scandal, the FIFA scandal, the Barclays Bank scandal, every time we get one of those scandals, it taints all of us who are leaders in business, because it develops a cynicism out there that you must be one of them, one of the ones who can't be trusted. And therefore we have to counter that. We have to work on these habits in order just to get back to zero in their minds. And then we have to keep building it, because without that, there is that prevailing cynicism that will drag us down. Thank you, David.
Okay, so I'm going to combine a few questions, because a lot of people are sort of asking things around the same sort of trail of thought. So a lot of people are asking around how trustworthiness should be measured. Somebody's asking, is it trust we should be measuring, or benevolence? And someone else has asked if these should be incorporated somehow into the corporate governance code for organizations, because many companies fail mostly in these basic elements, and they're sort of asking how we can really sort of, I suppose, put this into tangible terms in terms of trust, authenticity, and benevolence.
Yeah, what gets measured is treasured. And as part of my research, I've interviewed over 70 CEOs on the topic of trust. And the first question I asked them is, how important is trust? And everyone says trust is really, really important. The second question I asked them is, how are you measuring it in your organization? And I have yet to come across one organization that is directly measuring trust. I mean, people measure it through proxies, it might be customer loyalty or employee engagement, but how many people are actually measuring the raw KPI of trust and trustworthiness? And part of my motivation with this research is that in order to measure something, you need a model, and you need a reliable model. And what our clients are now doing with this model, through our work with the Trusted Executive Foundation, is they're using this model to measure trust. So we have built a survey tool that works with these habits, that has behaviors associated with each habit, and we can use that tool to measure and quantify trust in a culture, and then we can benchmark that trust with the trust that we've measured in other cultures. So one of the visions for this work is, over time, is to create that reliable benchmark for trust, to make it measurable, and to offer that as a tool to organizations, because if trust is going to keep becoming that important, we will get to the point where we measure it in the same way that we measure things that 20 years ago we couldn't measure, like employee engagement or net promoter score, or all these things that we thought were too soft and too fluffy to measure. If we've got the right focus, we will find a way to measure it. And I think in 5 years' time, you will find people measuring this much more. Hopefully some of them with this tool, but I'm sure there'll be other tools that appear. There's a lot of things happening at the moment within ESG investing, environmental, social governance investing. So even investors now are wanting to measure these aspects, these broader aspects of a culture, because they know that there are strategic risks for organizations that do not tick these boxes. And they know that they're living in times now that are different. And those investors, if nothing else, they know how to protect their investments. And they're recognizing that these broader aspects of culture, trust, reputation are becoming more and more important as part of that viability and sustainability of the modern business. Thank you, David. Maybe one more.
Okay, thank you. Don't think I've ever had so many questions in a webinar before. The next one, perhaps a more straightforward one. They're asking if factors such as gender or other diversity strands had any impact on your research when it came to trust.
Yeah, great question. I'm not an expert on diversity and inclusion, and but I've worked with this model enough now, with enough leaders to know that that diversity inclusion topic, a lot of that topic is about how do we create a psychologically safe space for diverse individuals, whatever the nature of that diversity is. We all need to be able to show up as who we are and be respected and included for who we are. And of course, a safe psychological space is actually a high trust space. So what we're finding with these habits is that our clients are beginning to use this language and these habits to talk about diversity and inclusion, because they're actually now talking about how do we create a psychologically safe space for everyone. And some of the language of trust is easier to work with and more neutral emotionally than some of that diversity and inclusion language, which can have the risk of polarizing and triggering people, because it's a very sensitive topic, as we know. And so I think trust and diversity and inclusion, there is definitely a link there between those topics. And again, one of the hopes for this work is that more people explore those links and build on that, in order that we can become, again, more skillful, more adept at building these psychologically safe environments in which everybody feels that their diversity, whatever the dimension of that diversity is respected. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. And let's go into what will actually be our final sprint. And at the end of this sprint, we're going to have a little poll as well, just to get you involved with working with the model as part of the webinar. So what I want to do in this next sprint is I want to talk about 3 habits in particular that I think right now in the new world of work, there is a real opportunity to work with these habits, and they're particularly important. And a lot of this has come from the various workshops and coaching and webinars that myself and the team have done over the last 12 months, that we've been listening to a lot of leaders, working with this model, and over time you pick up themes. And 3 habits that I think are particularly relevant to focus on in the next sort of weeks and months. And the first one I would highlight is be brave. And in the world of trust, bravery is not about physical, personal bravery. It's about moral bravery. The idea that at some point in the cycle, the leader self-sacrifices for the wider good. And when that happens, it inspires trust in people. And one of the examples just from my own part of the world in the UK, where there's an inspiration really and a role model for this, is Marcus Rashford, a young black footballer, plays for Manchester United. His job is to score goals. That's what his job is. But he had the moral bravery to get on the pitch of the topic of child poverty and child hunger in our country. And he, with his voice, he found his voice. He spoke up from that generation that gets it, that is seen with new eyes, And he influenced our government, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, to change a policy on child poverty and child hunger. And when he actually made that breakthrough, he tweeted that day, "I don't even know what to say. Just look at what we can do when we come together. This is England in 2020. And I think that is the call to action. This is the world in 2021. It's time to see with new eyes. It's time for us to find a voice to create the safe and just space. So I hope that, you all in your different ways will be finding that voice, whatever that voice is, that now is the time to speak and to do that with respect, with courage, with compassion. But there are things we need to talk about. And particularly if you're of that younger generation, I just see that is the opportunity that's there for you to take in the coming weeks and months. Second habit that I want to focus on is this habit of delivery. So many of us who've done MBAs, we'll think about the delivery challenge of the 3-year vision, the 3-year plan, the 12-month business plan. How do you plan for 12 months when you have a pandemic that comes in and turns the whole world upside down? And I'd love to say to you that I think that's the last disruptive event we're going to have in this decade. But I'm afraid I think this is a decade of disruption that we have embarked upon. And I fully expect that disruption will continue because we're going through such profound change. And so our attitude towards delivery, I think, will need to become more agile to reflect the reality of this disruption. And the world of agile methodologies that some of you will be more familiar with and more expert with than I am, but that agile methodology approach, I think, is going to become more and more common across more and more businesses, that we won't be looking at 1-year plans, we'll be looking at 12-week sprints. And we will do all the prototyping and the quick work to sort of be adaptive and flexible in this agile world of work. So I think that's one of the shifts that I do see happening, that again is a big change. But the agile methodologies, I think, are going to become increasingly important, and people who master this and who really become able to help others and coach others with this delivery mindset, I think are going to be in great demand in the coming years. And finally, last habit I wanted to mention is this word evangelize. Depending on which part of the world you might be in, this word might be more or less familiar to you. But what does it mean? It means spread the good news. Sometimes we hear about it in a religious context, but evangelizing is an important for business leaders as well, in that we need to have that vision. We need to be on the front foot to spread the good news about our leadership and our brand. And I think this last year has stretched our resilience. It's knocked us down, hasn't it? Every one of us, if we're honest, I think will have woken up at some time in the last 12 months and thought, really? Do I really have to go through this? And where is my motivation going to come from? To keep going through some of the challenges that we've had. And a client of mine, Richard Hyams, who's shown on this slide, he's chief executive of an architects organization, but he told me a lovely story about the power of this habit and how we need to approach this habit in these times. His sister-in-law was looking for a new property, and they'd visited all sorts of different properties that day as a couple, and they went to visit a house, and they came out of the house, and the husband turned to the wife and said, well, what do you think? And she said, well, it's got to be a no or a hell yeah. And to me, that sums up our choices right now in whatever job you're doing, whatever role you've got. When you wake up in the morning, it's got to be a no or it's got to be a hell yeah. Don't get caught in the middle ground of the maybe, of the yes maybe, or the I'm not sure. That's a very difficult place to sustain your motivation and energy in times like these. So I think we're called to sort of really be focused on our passion. Where can we go such that we get that hell yeah feeling? That we wake up on a Monday morning, we say, hell yeah, I am so glad that I'm doing this work. because if you get caught in different aspects, lesser aspects than that, I think the resilience challenge and the stamina challenge of really sustaining that over a period of time is incredibly difficult. And I think a lot of us will come out of this pandemic and lockdown really examining again, where is that real passion? And what is it that's a good enough reason for me to give this 110%? And that hell yeah moment, I think, is something that we've all got to sort of be sensitive to. And when we get that hell yeah moment, we need to hold on to it tightly, because that's what's going to allow us to stay the course of these particular challenging times. So at that point, David, I think we've got a poll, and one of the interesting things about the poll software that we're using is that we could only actually ask you for 5 choices on the poll. Obviously, if there had been 9 choices on the poll, I could have asked you which of the 9 habits is most important and critical for you in the coming sort of months. I've sort of guessed that 3 habits will be particularly important, but we've only got 5 choices that we could offer you. So I had to actually pull out 5 habits out of the 9. And I would like you to look at those 5 habits and choose, you know, if you were to choose one habit that you think is going to be most critical to your leadership impact in the next 6 months, you know, which habit would you choose? And just invite David to sort of administer the poll software for me.
Okay, so the poll's open. So just to reiterate the question, it's which habit is going to be most critical to you as you adapt to the new world of work? Be brave, be humble, coach, be open, or evangelize. And I can see that about 1/3 of you have filled it in, so thank you very much. I'll just leave it open for a couple more seconds.
So we're doing some instant market research here to get a feel for which of these habits do you think in this new world of work is going to be most important for you to focus on.
Okay, just a couple more seconds. Some people are still filling it in. Okay, I'm just going to close the poll now and give you the results. Okay, thanks everyone for filling it in. So 41% said be brave, 13% said be humble, 16% said coach, 19% said be open, and 11% said evangelize.
Just give me those numbers again, David. Let's just go through that again.
So 41% said be brave,
which is that's the highest one is be brave. What 41%? What was your next most popular?
The next most popular was be open with 19%.
Yeah.
And then coach with 16%.
Yeah.
Be humble with 13%. And evangelize with 11%.
Right, great. Well, thanks everyone for filling that in. So the top 2, be brave and be open. So that it sounds like that moral bravery message and that example we talked about with Marcus Rashford is chiming with a lot of you. I mean, I don't know exactly what the bravery is that you're focused on, but this is a time, yeah, when we are called to be brave. And so for you to practice that habit, and people say, well, how do I practice being brave? You know, where do I start with that? Well, I think that with bravery, the way to think about starting that is practice being brave in safer environments first. Build that habit in safer environments, and as you learn how to master it, you will find that you're able to demonstrate it in more and more challenging and potentially risky environments. So that would probably be my one tip around the be brave, and how to do that is practice that, you know, practice being brave in safer environments, get feedback, and then start to deploy that habit in more challenging situations. Be open. In our survey that we use, I mentioned about our 9 habits survey tool that we use in organizations to measure trust. Actually, being open is one of the weakest habits that we often see in organizational cultures. And be open involves a lot around vulnerability. The trusted leader is required to show some vulnerability in the right place and in the right time. So it doesn't surprise me that that habit has come out as our number 2 here today. It is, I think, a habit that in organizational life is often underdeveloped, and as leaders we're required to go first. So one of my favorites quotes about being open is from the author Brené Brown, who wrote a book, Daring Greatly, and it's a great resource if you want to go and explore that habit, being open a bit more. Then Brené Brown's book, Daring Greatly, is a recommendation. And she says in that book, vulnerability is the first thing I want to see in you, and it's the last thing I want you to see in me. And that pretty much sums up my attitude towards vulnerability for a lot of my career. It's great when it happens, but can you go first? The problem is leaders go first, and so this is a habit I'm personally working on to try and be more open, show a bit more of my full self, which might involve my failings, my weaknesses, my bad days, and sharing that and trusting that actually inspires trust in the groups that I work with. So yeah, hopefully that just gave you an opportunity to work with the model a bit, start to get used to some of these concepts, and it's having a language to talk about trust is part of what hopefully this model offers people. Is that it's easier to talk about 9 habits than to walk into a room and say to someone, you know what, I don't trust you. That's often a short conversation, but if you can talk about, let's look at this model, let's look at these habits, where do we think we're strong, where might we do better, then hopefully that's an easier conversation for people to have. So David, I think we're at a point where I've just got like a summary sort of next step slide, but otherwise we're open to sort of taking a few more questions.
Of course, we've had loads of questions come through. So first one, this person saying, as a new manager in a company, how do you earn trust from subordinates or employees who have lost trust in the organization?
Yeah, so you've come into a role and there's a history of a lack of trust, either of previous people who did your job or the more senior roles in that organization. I think that the good news there is that if you work on these habits and you build that trustworthiness, then the opportunity for them to build a personal relationship with you that is stronger than those other more abstract relationships that they might have with senior leaders or other aspects of organizational life. I think the relationship between the immediate team leader and the team member is often the most crucial one that most people focus on, and either makes or breaks your fulfillment in a role. Most people leave their managers rather than leave their organizations. So I think you have an opportunity there, hopefully, to stand out, to rebuild. There's a quote that might be helpful there around, when the room gets darker, it's an opportunity for your light to shine brighter. So I would encourage you to feel empowered, that with models like this, and that you can create your own subculture in your team. You can stand for trust in that team. It's not always easy. You get challenged. The boat rocks. But if you're really passionate about this, then I think there's an opportunity for you to believe in the power of your own presence and leadership, power of these daily habits which are within your control, and hopefully that gives you some sort of a starting point for going on that journey with a new team. Thank you, David.
Lovely, thank you very much. Someone else is saying, our social conscience is something that's on all of our radars, but sometimes people don't like to rock the boat because of fear of being attacked. Do you have any advice in overcoming this fear?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's one that we've all faced. That how can you be brave without rocking the boat? At some point the boat does rock, and we can. I think I think my advice with this is that sometimes we feel personally responsible that the boat is rocking, and we tend to think that it's our fault, and we tend to think that it's got to be a bad thing that the boat's rocking. But if boats never rock, then I don't know that we ever get to talk about the real stuff, and that we don't ever get moved on to a better space. We think about teams that build, and that we talk about the norming, the forming, norming, storming stage of team development. When you storm in a team, the boat rocks. It feels uncomfortable, and you can sometimes think that it's your fault, and and that this is unpleasant, this is uncomfortable. Sometimes we have to go through a bit of that as leaders, and have the courage to sit amongst the rocking of the boat, and trust that the boat doesn't rock forever. It will find its equilibrium, it will find its new point, and hopefully that's a point from which people can perform with greater trust and greater potential. So I can't sort of make that go away and make that an easy thing, but maybe it's just believing that it's part of a process, that this is part of a process that takes time, and does have its ups and downs, and just staying the course of that, and holding your nerve at that time when things can feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Love that answer, thank you. Somebody's saying, from the perspective of an employee, they would like to know what you think, or how you think the pillars we've discussed in the webinar might influence the criteria on which to focus when recruiting.
Yeah, actually somebody wrote to me on LinkedIn a few weeks ago and told me that they read the book and that they were using the model as part of their recruitment process, which was really interesting, because it's not something that in our sort of in the Trusted Executive Foundation that we particularly focused on. But again, if you've got a model and you can start to sort of use that model, and you can apply it then in whatever stage with whatever stakeholder that you want. And so I think you can start to build this set of questions and awareness into a recruitment process. Because if you're recruiting people who, you're inviting them to buy into this new world of work, then as well as looking at their competence, which typically a lot of recruitment processes would look at that ability pillar, I think we've got more used to looking at integrity, over the years, over the last 10 years. I think we're probably all more sensitive to that. We're probably asking more questions about that, looking for reference points around someone's integrity. The interesting one for me is that benevolence one. I mean, are you looking for that? When you interview someone, are you looking for someone who comes in and shows benevolence? And when you see that, do you actually prioritize that? Do you think it's valuable? Because the way they behave in that sort of recruitment process is likely to be what they bring into your culture. And if you want them to bring that benevolence as well as that ability and integrity, then maybe that's the biggest challenge in recruitment. How do we check for benevolence? What are the tiny noticeable things or the random acts of kindness that you might notice in a recruitment process that would give you that confidence that this person is actually caring about others as well as caring about themselves? Because we could have some fantastically competent people who are as honest as the day is long, but if they don't actually care about that wider community that you are building, clearly that's a risk. And I think that's maybe the area of the recruitment process, in my experience, that we're probably least got most to learn. Thanks, David. Maybe take a final question.
Sure. So a few people have asked around the sort of training in trust, and especially in a business school environment. So some people have said, how do you train trust within a business school? And also someone else has asked, what do you think should be the main focus which a business school should implement into programs and teaching in order to really instill trust or trustworthiness in their students?
Yeah, well, maybe that it was a great cue maybe to show my final slide, David, just as a summary. You know, you know, it's great to have the research, it's great to have a book, it's great to have a model, but how do you put this into practice? You know, how do you really make this real in an organization, whether that's a business school or another organization? And really that's what the Trusted Executive Foundation, myself and the team exist for, is that we're a not-for-profit, and we offer and invite organizations and leaders to go on what we call the journey of trust. And like all journeys, it has different stages. You know, there's a stage where we need to discover something, and today's webinar has been a little bit of that discovery. You know, hopefully people have discovered something new, seen with new eyes as part of this webinar experience, and obviously that's an important starting point. But then we need to explore. You know, once we've discovered, we need to explore in more detail. And again, often that's part of that exploration is measurement. How can we really make progress unless we're starting to measure this thing called trust? So we've got the exploration, and then there's a point where we need to get committed. We're either leaders who are relying on the power of trust, or we're leaders who trust and empower. To me, it's like you can't be half pregnant. There's a point where you've got to make a choice about that currency of leadership. And if you're really committed with your team and your organization to trust, then there's a point when you will need to get committed. And to me, that's a more serious commitment around leadership development, involving individual coaching, team coaching. You know, behavioral change is difficult, but we know that coaching is a great tool to help leaders who are going through behavioral change. And then the last element of our sort of approach, community. It's easier to do this stuff when you're in a community that shares your passion for it and is role modeling best practice around that. So part of what we do in the foundation is bring together leaders who really want to excel at this, and we put them in peer group networks where they get the opportunity to share with each other, to inspire each other, to challenge each other. But the golden thread that's running through all of that journey is that commitment to trust, and using the research that's available to really make it stick and embed it over a period of time. So, you know, that's a sort of a process. It takes time, but it starts with somebody getting serious and saying, yeah, now is the time to see with new eyes. You know, now is the time we're shifting from one world of work to another world of work, and we, as an individual or as an organization, we want to win in the new game. And if the new game is about trust, we want to win in that game, and we want to be pioneering with that. And not every organization will choose to do that. Not every leader will choose to do that. But I hope that there are a number on this webinar today who are looking to pioneer and to sort of seize the moment in terms of, what are we building? Are we building back better? Are we building back greener? Are we building back fairer? We need leaders to help make sure that we deliver on the opportunity that's in front of us, and we avoid the risks of the culture wars that will happen increasingly if we do not decide to stand for trust at this time. Thank you, David.
I think we've got time for one more, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Somebody's talking about humble over hubris and the idea of the raw, authentic kind of leadership that is a statistically significant attribute of high-performing leaders. And they're asking if you see this as well. And I suppose building on that, in this decade of disruption, do you see there being a new leader who is stronger by personal adverse experiences, and therefore enabled to provide greater opportunities for a wider population than before?
Just give me that again, David.
So I suppose they're sort of ascertaining a growth in a raw, authentic kind of leadership that is a significant attribute of high-performing leaders. And they're asking, in a decade of disruption, do you also see the idea of this new leader who has been stronger because of personal adverse experiences and therefore able to provide greater opportunities to wider numbers of people?
Yeah, I think new leaders will emerge you know, nature hates a vacuum, and I think new leaders will emerge to sort of, as I say, sort of pick up this mantle, and authenticity is going to be you know, a significant aspect of their leadership presence, which is very closely, I say, linked to that ability to build trust. That if you're authentic, then you can build trust. Although someone did say to me recently that they thought Hitler, you could have described Hitler as quite an authentic person, and that this word authenticity can sometimes be morally neutral. And I don't think that we're looking for morally neutral authentic leaders in this decade. I do think there's a moral dimension that is going to be very critical. So I would probably combine that authenticity with a moral stewardship that I think is an important ally to that authenticity aspect.
Thank you very much. I think that is all we've got time for. Thank you all for sending in your questions. I can see there's quite a few still waiting. I'll pass those on to John after the event and ask him to take a look at those. All that remains for me to say is just to remind everyone that we do record all our webinars, so we will be sending a copy of this webinar to you probably within about a week, so you can catch up on anything you missed or have another listen. All that remains for me to say now is thank you again for listening, everyone, and thank you very much to John for taking the time to speak to us today on such a really important topic that I think a lot of people have really engaged with over the past hour. So thank you very much for that. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you again.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.